in the glittering ballroom of the St. Regis, where legacy and ambition drank champagne together, James Thorne was on top of the world. He was handsome, charismatic, and about to receive the coveted Beacon of the Community award. His wife Hannah, 6 months pregnant and visibly weary, watched from their table, her smile a fragile shield against his chilling indifference. Tonight he wouldn't just ignore her. He would use her as a punchline in front of the city's elite. He would mock her changing body, her quiet nature, her simplicity. But James made one catastrophic miscalculation. He had no idea who was sitting in the shadows, listening to every cruel word the Gala's mysterious, anonymous benefactor. A man who hadn't been seen in public for a decade. A man who also happened to be Hannah's brother. The air in the Bentley was thick with a silence that was heavier than any argument. Hannah traced the condensation on her window, the glittering lights of downtown Chicago, blurring into streaks of gold and ruby. Beside her, James Thorne adjusted his bow tie in the reflection of his phone screen, his jaw tight. He hadn't spoken a full sentence to her since they left their sterile minimalist penthouse overlooking Millennium Park. "You look tired, Hannah," he said, finally, his voice not carrying concern but accusation. "Can you try to brighten up a little? Tonight is important." Hannah smoothed a hand over the gentle swell of her stomach, the bespoke emerald gown feeling more like a costume than a celebration of her changing form. The baby, a boy they had already named Leo, kicked softly, a secret flutter of reassurance. "I'm fine, James. Just a little out of breath. These galas are always so long." "It's the heart of the city gala." He corrected his tone sharp. "The most important philanthropic event of the year. My firm Thorne and Vance is the lead sponsor. I am the lead sponsor, and I'm receiving the Beacon Award. It's not just a gala." He made it sound as though she were a simpleton, incapable of grasping the nuances of his world. It was a tone she had become painfully accustomed to. When they met, James had been enchanted by what he called her uncomplicated grace. She was a librarian, quiet and well-read, with a kind heart and a past she kept intentionally vague. He was a rising star in investment banking, a predator in a bespoke suit who saw her as a beautiful, pliable accessory. He thought he was marrying a blank canvas he could paint his ambitions upon. "I know it's important," she said softly. "I'm very proud of you." His response was a non-committal grunt as he scrolled through his prepared speech. The pride she felt was real, but it was curdled with a growing dread. In the early days, his ambition had been thrilling. Now it was a ravenous beast, and it was slowly devouring the man she thought she loved, leaving behind a hollow shell of ego and entitlement. Her phone buzzed in her small clutch. A text from her brother Damien. "You okay, Ellie? You don't have to go." She typed back quickly, hiding the screen from James's peripheral vision. "I'm fine. I have to support the man of the hour. You know how it is." "I do. Which is why I'm telling you that you don't. He doesn't deserve it." A sad smile touched Hannah's lips. Damien always knew. He was the only person in the world who understood the gilded cage she lived in, because he had helped build it. The Sterling family fortune was an ocean vast and deep, and for their own safety and sanity, they had chosen to live as though they only had a small lake. After a terrifying kidnapping attempt when they were children, their parents had instilled in them a fierce need for privacy. They were raised to believe that their wealth was a tool, not an identity. Damien, a reclusive genius, had taken that to heart, building a tech empire under a corporate pseudonym. His identity as Sterling, a fiercely guarded secret, known to only a handful of lawyers. Hannah had wanted something different. She wanted to be loved for who she was, not for the 9 zeros that trailed after her family name. When she met James, she had a modest trust fund enough to live comfortably, but not enough to scream heiress. She told him her family was in logistics, a technically true but deeply misleading description of the global shipping and technology conglomerate Sterling Industries had become. James, in his arrogance, never dug deeper. He saw a pretty girl with just enough money to not be a burden and a background plain enough to not overshadow his own. Now trapped in the polished interior of the Bentley, Hannah felt the weight of her choices. She had wanted a normal life, but she had ended up with a man who worshipped the very thing she had tried to escape, and he was beginning to resent her for not providing more of it. "For God's sake, Hannah, fix your lipstick," James snapped, pulling her from her thoughts. "You look washed out. Beatrice Vance will be there, and you know how she talks." Beatrice was the wife of his senior partner, a woman with a tongue like a razor blade and an insatiable appetite for gossip. Hannah swallowed the lump in her throat, pulled a tube of Chanel lipstick from her clutch, and painted on a smile she didn't feel the reflection in the compact, showing a woman she barely recognized. The car pulled up to the grand entrance of the St. Regis Hotel, and as the valet opened her door, Hannah took a deep breath, preparing to step onto the stage of her husband's grandest performance. The grand ballroom of the St. Regis was a symphony of excess. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, dripped light onto a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. The air hummed with the self-important chatter of Chicago's financial elite. The clinking of glasses, a constant tinkling applause for their own success. For James, this was his natural habitat. For Hannah, it felt like drowning in perfume and ambition. James immediately released her arm as they stepped inside his eyes, scanning the room for targets, not companions. "There's Jonathan Abernathy," he murmured, his gaze locking onto a portly, silver-haired man, holding court near the silent auction. "He's the keynote. I need 5 minutes with him. Try to look busy." He was gone before she could reply, leaving her standing alone at the edge of the swirling crowd. A waiter offered her a flute of champagne. She politely declined, asking for sparkling water instead. The simple act felt like a statement in this room. While everyone else was indulging, she was nurturing. It made her feel profoundly, achingly different. She found their assigned table number 1, directly in front of the enormous stage. It was a place of honor, a clear signal of James's importance tonight. The centerpiece was an extravagant explosion of white orchids and calla lilies so large she could barely see the other side of the table. "Hannah, darling, you look comfortable." The voice was sweet as saccharin and just as artificial. Beatrice Vance, a woman who looked like she was sculpted from porcelain, and disdain glided towards her. She was wearing a blood-red dress that clung to her impossibly thin frame, her diamonds flashing like warnings. "Beatrice," Hannah said, forcing a smile. "You look stunning." "Thank you." Beatrice purred her eyes, flicking dismissively over Hannah's baby bump. "It's a vintage Dior. James is making quite the splash tonight, isn't he? The Beacon Award. My husband is simply green with envy." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "He tells me James is on the fast track to a full partnership. You must be so proud. Just try not to let the nesting phase distract him too much. Men at his level need a wife who is an asset, not just an accessory." The veiled insult landed exactly as intended. Beatrice was reminding Hannah of her perceived role to be beautiful, silent, and useful. A pregnant woman in a comfortable gown did not fit that description. "I think my husband's success speaks for itself," Hannah replied, her voice cooler than she expected. Beatrice's perfectly arched eyebrow rose a fraction. "Of course, dear." She patted Hannah's arm with 2 fingers before drifting away, leaving a trail of expensive perfume and subtle malice in her wake. Hannah sank into her chair, her hand instinctively going to her stomach. Leo kicked again, harder this time, as if sensing her distress. She watched James across the room. He was a master performer, laughing at Mr. Abernathy's joke, clasping a shoulder here, shaking a hand there. He looked powerful, charming, every bit the man of the hour. But she saw the truth. She saw the calculation in his eyes, the way his smile never quite reached them. She saw him glance over at her, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features as he took in her solitary, seated form, before turning back to his audience with renewed vigor. He was ashamed of her. The realization hit her not like a lightning bolt, but like the slow, creeping chill of a winter evening. In the beginning he had paraded her like a trophy. Now, pregnant and less ornamental, she was a liability. The lights in the ballroom began to dim, and a smooth, professional voice filled the air. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you would please take your seats, our program is about to begin." James finally returned to the table, his face flushed with excitement. He sat down without looking at her. "Abernathy loves the pitch," he said, straightening his cutlery. "He's practically guaranteed my seat on the board for the new tech fund." "That's wonderful, James," she said, trying to inject some enthusiasm into her voice. "It is," he said, finally turning to her. His eyes were cold. "So please, Hannah, when I go up there, I want you to smile. Look at me like you're the luckiest woman in the world. Can you do that for me?" It wasn't a request. It was an order. He was scripting her role in his play, and she was expected to perform it without flaw. She nodded her throat tight, the beautiful ballroom, suddenly feeling like a courtroom where she was about to be judged. The host, a local news anchor, began the proceedings talking about the charity, the lives they were changing. Then he moved on to the awards. "And now," the host boomed, "to present the 2025 Beacon of the Community Award to a man whose dedication and vision have been an inspiration to us all. Ms. James Thorne." A warm spotlight hit their table as a wave of applause washed over them. James stood up, buttoning his jacket. He leaned down, his lips close to her ear, his voice a venomous whisper. "Don't forget to smile." Then he turned, gave her a dazzling public smile for the benefit of the cameras, and walked towards the stage. Hannah watched him go, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. She arranged her face into the requested expression of adoration, feeling like the biggest fraud in the room. The spotlight followed James as he bounded onto the stage, radiating a confidence that bordered on arrogance. He shook the host's hand, accepted the heavy, flame-shaped crystal award, and turned to face the microphone. The applause was thunderous. From the audience he looked like a king surveying his kingdom. "Thank you," he began, his voice smooth and practiced, resonating through the ballroom. "Thank you all. I'm truly humbled." Hannah watched her painted-on smile, feeling stiff and unnatural. She felt the eyes of hundreds of people on her, the wife of the great man. She was part of the tableau, the silent, supportive figure in the background of his success story. James launched into his speech, a well-rehearsed ode to corporate responsibility and the spirit of Chicago. He thanked his firm, his partners, and his mentor, Mr. Abernathy, who gave a gracious nod from the head table. He was charming, witty, and hit all the right notes. The crowd was captivated. But we all know," he continued, a playful glint in his eye, "that success isn't built in a boardroom. It's built at home. And for that, I have to thank my incredible wife, Hannah." He gestured towards her, and the spotlight swung to pin her to her seat. A fresh wave of polite applause rippled through the room. Hannah's smile faltered for a second as the heat of the light washed over her. She felt exposed, vulnerable. "She's been my rock," James said, his tone shifting. It was a subtle change, but Hannah felt it instantly. The sincerity was gone, replaced by something slick and performative. And lately she's taken the term rock quite literally. She's been expanding in her role. A few scattered, uncertain chuckles came from the audience. Hannah's blood ran cold. He couldn't be. Not here. Not now. "When we met," James went on, leaning into the microphone like a seasoned comedian. "She was this slip of a thing. A librarian. Can you believe it? All quiet corners and dusty books. I told her I was going to broaden her horizons, and boy, has she taken that to heart." The laughter was louder this time, more confident. James paused, soaking it in. He looked directly at Hannah, his eyes holding hers. There was no love there, only a cruel, triumphant glint. He was enjoying this. He was using her pregnancy, her very being as a prop for his own amusement. "Now her horizons are definitely broader," he said, making a curving gesture with his hands. "She's fully embraced her new project, creating the next Thorn heir, and she's dedicated her main hobbies these days are nesting, napping, and sending me out for the most bizarre food combinations at 3 a.m., pickles and peanut butter. Anyone!" The room erupted in laughter. It felt like a physical blow to Hannah. Each laugh was a stone thrown at her. She could feel Beatrice Vance's smug gaze from across the room. She could feel the pitying looks from other women. Her cheeks burned with a shame so intense it was dizzying. He was reducing her to a caricature, a walking, waddling pregnancy cliché, stripping away her dignity one punchline at a time. "But I love her for it," he said, the words dripping with insincerity. "She keeps me grounded. While I'm out here trying to change the world, she's at home figuring out which shade of beige is best for the nursery. It's all about balance, you see." He was painting her as a simple domestic creature, entirely separate from his world of power and influence. It was a calculated move to reinforce his own image as the sole architect of their success, while diminishing her to the point of invisibility. Every word was a betrayal, a public stoning disguised as a light-hearted tribute. Tears pricked at the corners of Hannah's eyes, hot and stinging. She fought them back, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her cry. She kept the smile plastered on her face, a grotesque mask of spousal pride, while inside her world was shattering. The man she had married, the man whose child she was carrying, was capable of this. He could stand on a stage under the adoring gaze of his peers and casually, cruelly dismantle the person he had vowed to protect. He finished his speech to another round of thunderous applause. "To my beautiful blossoming wife, Hannah. Thank you for everything." He raised the crystal award in a toast to her, the ultimate insult. The spotlight left her, and she was plunged back into the relative darkness of the ballroom. But the burning shame remained. She felt hundreds of pairs of eyes on her, some amused, some pitying, all judging. She wanted to disappear, to run from the ballroom, from the city, from the life she had so foolishly chosen. She sat frozen, the sound of the applause ringing in her ears like a death knell for her marriage. In that moment, surrounded by 1,000 people, Hannah Sterling had never felt so utterly and completely alone. The applause for James eventually faded, replaced by the polite murmur of dinner service. Waiters moved like ghosts between tables, serving meticulously plated entrees that Hannah couldn't imagine eating. Her appetite had vanished, replaced by a hollow, nauseous feeling in the pit of her stomach. James had not yet returned to the table, caught in a swarm of well-wishers and backslappers near the stage, all of them congratulating him on his award and his hilarious speech. Hannah stared at the untouched plate of seared scallops in front of her, the delicate food looking obscene in its artistry. Every fibre of her being screamed at her to leave. But where would she go? Back to the cold, empty penthouse that James called home. The thought was unbearable. Her mind raced back to the family pact, the vow of silence. It had been made with the best of intentions to protect them, to allow them to live normal lives. But her normal life had become a prison. She had disarmed herself, stripped herself of her identity, to win the love of a man who was only capable of loving a reflection of himself. She had made herself small so he could feel big. And tonight, he had stood on that smallness to reach even higher. A deep, primal anger began to smolder beneath the layers of her shame. It was anger on behalf of herself, but more fiercely on behalf of her unborn son. What kind of father would Leo have? A man who would use his own mother as a punchline. A man who saw family not as a sanctuary, but as another audience to Imra's. The host returned to the stage, his cheerful voice jarring against Hannah's inner turmoil. "Thank you again, James Thorne, for that memorable speech," the host said, with just a hint of reservation. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special surprise. As you know, this gala and the incredible work of the Heart of the City Foundation is made possible by the generosity of our donors. Tonight, our lead benefactor, who for years has wished to remain anonymous, has decided to step into the light. He is a titan of industry, a visionary in the world of technology, and a man whose quiet philanthropy has reshaped countless lives in this city." A ripple of intrigue went through the room. Even James paused, his glad-handing, his attention drawn to the stage. Everyone knew about the gala's mysterious angel donor, whose contributions were so immense they dwarfed all others combined. The identity of this person was the most delicious secret in Chicago society. He asked that I keep his introduction simple. The host continued, a note of awe in his voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in offering a long-overdue round of applause for the founder of Oculon Dynamics and the chairman of the Sterling Foundation, Damian Sterling." The name hung in the air for a moment. Sterling. For most people in the room, it meant little. It was not a name that frequented the society pages. It was not a name like Thorne or Abernathy that was etched onto the city's financial landscape. But for Hannah, the name was a lightning strike. Damien. Her head snapped up, her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, desperate beat. It couldn't be. Damien never made public appearances. He valued his anonymity above all else. He was a ghost, a legend in the tech world, known only by his initials, DS. Across the room, James frowned, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. "Sterling," he muttered to the man next to him. "Never heard of him." Then from a dimly lit alcove near the side of the ballroom, a figure emerged. He wasn't tall or imposing. He wore a simple, impeccably tailored charcoal suit, no tie, the top button of his white shirt undone. His dark hair was slightly unkempt, and his face, which was usually softened by a wry smile when he was with her, was a mask of cold fury. He moved with a quiet, deliberate grace, his eyes fixed on the stage. Hannah stopped breathing. It was him. It was her brother. He had texted her, "You don't have to go." He knew what James was. He must have been here the whole time, watching from the shadows, watching and listening to every single word of James's cruel performance. Damien walked past the head table, past the gawking faces of Jonathan Abernathy and Beatrice Vance, and ascended the small set of stairs to the stage. He didn't look at the audience. He walked directly to the host, shook his hand firmly, and took the microphone. The room was utterly silent. The air crackled with anticipation. A man no one knew had just been introduced as the most powerful benefactor in the room, and he looked nothing like they expected. Damien Sterling stood at the podium, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the emotional storm brewing within him. He adjusted the microphone, the small sound echoing in the cavernous, silent hall. And then his gaze swept across the room and landed directly on Hannah. In his eyes she saw a decade of unspoken promises, a lifetime of fierce protective love. Then his eyes shifted, moving to table 1, and settled on James Thorne, who was now staring back, a dawning look of bewildered apprehension on his handsome face. The reckoning had arrived. Damien let the silence hang in the air for a long moment, a deliberate, calculated pause that drew every eye, every ounce of attention in the room, directly to him. He didn't have James's slick, practiced charisma. He had something far more potent, an aura of absolute, unshakable authority. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, yet it carried to every corner of the ballroom clear as a bell. "Good evening," he began. "I apologize for the unexpected nature of my appearance tonight. For a long time, I've believed that philanthropy should be a quiet conversation between a person's conscience and their community. But tonight, something compelled me to speak up." His gaze flickered back to James, who was now standing awkwardly halfway between the crowd of his admirers and his table. "Mr. Thorne," Damien said, his voice dropping a register, becoming harder, colder. "You gave quite a speech just now. Witty. Entertaining. You received the Beacon of the Community Award. A beacon is supposed to be a source of light, of guidance, of hope. I find myself questioning if you truly understand what that means." James's confident smirk wavered. A murmur rippled through the audience. This was not the standard fawning speech of a donor. This was a confrontation. "You spoke at length about your wife." Damien continued, his grip on the microphone tightening almost imperceptibly. "You shared some intimate anecdotes. You held her up for our amusement." He paused again, letting the words sink in. He turned his head slightly, his eyes finding Hannah's. He gave her the smallest, most reassuring of nods, a silent message that said, "I'm here. It's over." Then he turned his full attention back to James, and the quiet authority in his voice was replaced by a steel edge. "What you failed to mention, Mr. Thorne, what you have apparently failed to grasp in the entire time you have known her, is the truth of who she is." Damien's eyes scanned the room, from Mr. Abernathy's confused, stern face to Beatrice Vance's rapt, hungry expression. "You see the woman you so casually mocked tonight, the woman you painted as a simple domestic accessory to your grand ambitions. That woman is Hannah Sterling." A collective audible gasp swept through the ballroom. The name, which had been meaningless moments before, was now a thunderclap. "Sterling, like Damien Sterling." "She is my sister," Damien stated, his voice ringing with absolute finality. The world tilted on its axis for James Thorne. His face, which had been flushed with triumph, went slack. The color drained from it, leaving a pasty, sickly white. His eyes darted from Damien on the stage to Hannah at the table, his mind frantically trying to connect the dots. The librarian. The simple girl. Sterling. It was impossible. It was a joke. But one look at the stony, furious expression on Damien's face and the quiet, heart-breakingly resolute look on Hannah's told him it was no joke. It was a nightmare. "My sister." Damien's voice boomed now, filled with a righteous fury that he had clearly kept leashed for years, "is the co-heir to the Sterling Industries fortune. A fortune that, I assure you, makes the combined net worth of everyone in this room look like a rounding error. She is not the wife of the man of the hour. Mr. Thorne, you are, and have always been, the husband of the woman of the century." The shock in the room was palpable. You could hear champagne glasses being set down, forks clattering onto plates. The professional photographers who had been packing up scrambled to get their cameras back out, the flashes starting to pop like fireworks. This was the story of the decade. "My family values privacy," Damien explained, his voice softening slightly as he looked at Hannah again. "We have always valued it above all else. We believe a person's worth is in their character, not their bank account. My sister, in her infinite grace and optimism, wanted to be loved for herself. She wanted a man who would see the light inside her, not the gold that surrounds her. She chose you, Mr. Thorne. She saw something in you that I must confess I never did." He let that indictment hang in the air. "She gave you her heart, her trust, and her loyalty, and in return you gave her your contempt. You stood on this very stage and used her pregnancy, the most sacred and beautiful journey of her life, as fodder for cheap laughs, to impress a room full of people whose approval you so desperately crave." James was frozen, a statue of pure horror. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. His entire world, his carefully constructed reality, had been demolished in less than 2 minutes. He was not the powerful man who had married down. He was the court jester who had unknowingly married the princess and then proceeded to mock her in front of the entire kingdom. And her brother the king was now holding his life in the palm of his hand. The ballroom, once a sea of polite applause and appreciative laughter for James, had transformed into a silent, gaping arena. Every eye was fixed on the drama unfolding, the air thick with the scandal of it all. James Thorne, the newly crowned beacon of the community, was being publicly dismantled, and no one could look away. Damien Sterling, however, was just getting started. He wasn't a man given to histrionics. His anger was a cold, precise instrument, and he wielded it with devastating skill. "Mr. Thorne is a man who understands assets," Damien said, his voice calm and level, like a surgeon discussing an operation. "He is an investment banker after all. He assesses value. So let's talk about value." He looked toward the head table, his eyes locking with Jonathan Abernathy's. "Mr. Abernathy, I'm sure you believe James Thorne to be one of your firm's greatest assets, a real rainmaker. But I wonder if you're aware of the source of his seed capital." Abernathy leaned forward, his face a grim mask. James, if it were possible, turned an even paler shade of white. "That modest trust fund my sister came with," Damien continued. "It was an allowance, Mr. Thorne. A carefully managed drip feed from a vast reservoir designed to see if you were a worthy steward. The down payment on your shared penthouse in the Thorne and Vance portfolio, it was paid for with sterling money. The $500,000 investment that launched your personal hedge fund 2 years ago, the one that gave you the credibility to make partner." That was sterling money. The charitable donation of $1 million that your firm made in your name to this very foundation. The donation that secured you this award tonight. Mr. Thorne didn't pay a single cent of it. Damien paused, letting the revelation sink in. My sister authorized that donation from her personal accounts because she believed in the cause, and she wanted so desperately to believe in you. She wanted to help build you up. She thought your success would bring you happiness, and that you would share it with her. He shook his head, a look of profound disappointment on his face. You haven't been building a career, Mr. Thorne. You've been living on a subsidy. You're not a self-made man. You are a project my sister funded, and I am here tonight to tell you that your funding has been officially and irrevocably terminated. The sound that escaped James's throat was a strangled gasp. He looked desperately toward Mr. Abernathy, his boss, his mentor. Abernathy's face was like granite. He stared at James with an expression of pure, unadulterated contempt. The lie was one thing. The public humiliation for the firm was unforgivable. Damien wasn't finished. His final move was not one of destruction, but of creation. The Sterling Foundation is the largest philanthropic organization you've never heard of, he announced to the stunned room. Tonight we are launching a new public-facing initiative, a $50 billion fund dedicated to supporting women's health, early childhood education, and shelters for domestic abuse victims across North America. It will be one of the largest private endowments in the world. He turned his gaze back to Hannah, and for the first time a genuine warmth filled his voice, a deep well of love and pride. And I can think of no one better to lead it. I am thrilled to announce the appointment of the first president and chairwoman of the Sterling North American Foundation, Ms. Hannah Sterling. The room erupted in a cacophony of gasps and frantic whispers. In one move, Damien had not only destroyed James, he had elevated Hannah to a position of immense power and influence, a role far grander than any James could have ever dreamed of for himself. He had taken the woman James painted as a simple-minded nester and revealed her as a queen, handing her a kingdom. Now it was Hannah's turn. Throughout Damien's speech, she had sat absorbing the shock, the vindication, the overwhelming love from her brother. The shame that had burned her cheeks was gone, replaced by a cool, clear certainty. The tears she had fought back were gone too. Her eyes were dry and steady. Slowly, gracefully, she rose to her feet. The emerald dress no longer felt like a costume. It felt like armor. She smoothed a hand over her baby bump, a gesture not of weariness but of strength. She was not just Hannah anymore. She was a mother, a leader, and sterling. James, finally jolted from his paralysis by the sight of her standing, took a stumbling step towards their table. Hannah, he croaked, his voice pathetic and pleading. Hannah, I can explain. It was a joke. A stupid joke. Hannah looked at him. She looked at the man she had loved, the man who had just publicly humiliated her, now reduced to a begging, broken shell. There was no hatred in her gaze. There wasn't even anger anymore. There was only a profound, bottomless pity. She didn't say a word. She simply held his gaze for a moment, then gave him a small, final shake of her head. With all the dignity in the world, she turned her back on him. She walked toward the stage, toward her brother, and toward the first day of her new life, leaving James Thorne utterly and completely alone in the ruins of his own making. The walk to the stage felt like the longest and shortest journey of Hannah's life. The whispers and stares of the crowd seemed to fade into a distant hum. The only thing she saw was Damien standing by the podium, his hand outstretched towards her. When she reached him, he wrapped her in a fierce, protective hug. "I'm so sorry, Ellie," he whispered into her hair. "I should have stepped in sooner." You stepped in at exactly the right time, she whispered back, a single grateful tear finally tracing a path down her cheek. Behind them, the scene at table 1 was one of quiet, brutal implosion. James stood alone, a pariah, in a spotlight of his own making. Jonathan Abernathy walked slowly over to him, not to offer comfort, but to deliver a final verdict. My office. 9 a.m. sharp, the older man said, his voice low and guttural. Bring your resignation. He didn't wait for a response before turning and striding out of the ballroom, his disgust a palpable force. Beatrice Vance shot James a look of withering pity before sweeping her husband away, eager to be the first to spread the juiciest gossip the city had seen in a generation. One by one, the people who had been clapping him on the back just 30 minutes ago now avoided his gaze, steering their partners away from him as if he were contagious. He was radioactive. Damien led Hannah off the stage through a side exit, away from the prying eyes and popping flashbulbs. In the quiet service corridor, the adrenaline began to fade, and a deep, shuddering breath escaped Hannah's lips. What now? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Now we go home, Damien said gently. Our home. A few days later, the fallout had settled like a thick, toxic dust over Chicago's financial district. James Thorne was not just fired. He was erased. Thorne and Vance had issued a public statement condemning his gross misrepresentation of his contributions and his appalling lack of personal integrity. His name was being stripped from the firm. His accounts, so deeply entangled with Hannah's funds, were frozen pending a forensic audit. The divorce papers had been filed by Sterling's notoriously ruthless legal team, citing irreconcilable differences and emotional cruelty. James Thorne. The man who had everything was left with nothing but his expensive suits and the public shame that now clung to him like a shroud. Hannah, meanwhile, was not in their penthouse. She was in the sprawling, elegant lakefront estate in Lake Forest, where she and Damien had grown up, a place she hadn't seen in years. The air smelled of old books and fresh lake breezes. For the first time in her marriage, she felt like she could breathe. She sat with Damien in the sun-drenched library, a laptop open in front of her. She was already reading preliminary proposals for the new foundation, her mind sharp and engaged in a way it hadn't been for years. The role of librarian had been a comfort, a quiet place to hide. The role of chairwoman felt like a calling. "Are you sure about this?" Ellie Damien asked, watching her. "It's a huge responsibility. You don't have to do it. You don't have to do anything." Hannah looked up from the screen, a genuine smile gracing her lips. It was the first real smile she'd felt in months. She placed a hand on her stomach, where Leo was kicking contentedly. "I have to," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I'm not just doing it for me. I'm doing it for him." She looked around the library at the legacy of her family, a legacy of quiet strength and profound responsibility. "I spent so long trying to be small, trying to hide from this. I thought that's what love required. But I was wrong." She had learned a brutal lesson. True partnership wasn't about one person diminishing themselves for the other. It was about two people building something bigger together. James had never been interested in building with her. He had only wanted to build upon her. "He thought I was his foundation," she said softly, more to herself than to Damien. He was right. But he forgot that a foundation can also be reclaimed to build something new. Her new life was just beginning. It wouldn't be the simple, normal life she had once craved, but it would be hers. A life of purpose, power, and integrity. A life where she would teach her son that a person's true worth is not measured by the applause they receive, but by the dignity with which they treat others. The gilded cage was broken, and she was finally, truly free. 3 months passed. The Chicago winter had given way to a tentative spring, but Hannah had hardly noticed. Her world had become a whirlwind of boardrooms, financial statements, and philanthropic strategy. The sterling North American Foundation wasn't an office. It was an institution occupying the top 5 floors of a sleek glass tower on Wacker Drive. Her corner office offered a panoramic view of the Chicago River, a constant flowing reminder that life moved on. The role of chairwoman was not the ceremonial position she had secretly feared it might be. Damien had ensured it came with real power, and with that power came a crushing weight of expectation. Her initial days were a blur of overwhelming information. She was no longer just dealing with the Dewey Decimal System. She was grappling with billion-dollar endowments, intricate tax laws, and the heartbreakingly complex logistics of large-scale social intervention. Imposter syndrome was a constant, unwelcome companion. The board members, while publicly deferential to Ms. Sterling, were seasoned veterans of finance and non-profit work. She could feel their unspoken questions hanging in the air during every meeting. Is she just a figurehead? Is this just the billionaire brother's pet project for his wronged sister? The heart of this skepticism was a woman named Evelyn Reed. Evelyn was the Foundation's chief operating officer, a sharp, pragmatic woman in her late 60s with a severe silver bob and an even more severe gaze. She had been with the Sterling Foundation's private arm for 30 years and knew its inner workings better than anyone. She was not cruel like Beatrice Vance, but she was entirely unsentimental. She dealt in data results and efficiency, and she made it subtly clear that she was not yet convinced of Hannah's qualifications. The battle of wills came to a head during a budget allocation meeting for the first fiscal quarter. The agenda item was a $5 million discretionary grant for a new women's shelter initiative. The board's advisory committee had recommended a safe, prestigious recipient, a new wing for the sociology department at the University of Chicago dedicated to studying the effects of domestic violence. It was a solid, reputable choice that would generate good press and academic papers. Hannah had a different idea. Her own team of researchers, a group she had hand-picked for their on-the-ground experience, had identified a coalition of small, struggling grassroots shelters in the city's most underserved neighborhoods. These places were underfunded and overlooked. They didn't have fancy fundraising galas or university letterheads. They had broken locks, overflowing pantries, and a desperate daily fight to keep the lights on. They were high risk. They lacked the sophisticated reporting metrics Evelyn Reed cherished. But they were on the front lines. "With respect, Madam Chairwoman," Evelyn said, her voice crisp and devoid of warmth as she addressed the board. "While the coalition's mission is noble, they lack the infrastructure for a grant of this magnitude. Their administrative overhead is unclear, and their long-term viability is questionable. The university proposal is a blue-chip investment in research that can inform policy for decades. It is the more prudent course of action." The heads around the polished mahogany table nodded in agreement. It was the logical, sensible choice. Hannah felt a familiar wave of doubt wash over her. Who was she, the former librarian, to challenge this room of experts? She took a breath, her hand resting on her now prominent belly. Leo kicked a small internal jolt of encouragement. She thought of James and his obsession with appearances, with prestigious names and public perception. She thought of how he had dismissed her, how he had made her feel small and inconsequential. These small shelters were being dismissed in the same way. "Thank you, Evelyn." Hannah began, her voice quiet but firm, drawing every eye in the room. "The university's work is undoubtedly important, but research papers don't give a woman and her children a safe place to sleep tonight. Policy changes take years. These women need help now." She clicked a button, and the large screen behind her, which had been showing financial projections, switched to a simple photograph of a worn-out door with 3 different deadbolts. "This is the entrance to the Southside Sanctuary House," Hannah said. "I visited it last Tuesday, unannounced. They are currently housing 17 women and 23 children in a space designed for 10 people. The director, a woman named Maria Flores, hasn't taken a salary in 6 months. She uses her own pension check to buy groceries when the donations run dry." She looked directly at Evelyn. "You're right. Their administrative overhead is unclear because their administration is 2 exhausted women running on coffee and sheer force of will. Their long-term viability is questionable because organizations like ours, the ones with the real power to ensure it, have been too busy funding studies about them instead of funding them." Her voice grew stronger, filled with a passion that came from a place of deep personal understanding. "We are the Sterling Foundation. We have the resources to take calculated risks. I propose we not only fund this coalition, but that we use the Foundation's resources to build the infrastructure they lack. We will fund their operations, yes, but we will also provide them with grant writers, accountants, and project managers. We won't just give them a fish, we will teach them how to run a commercial fishing fleet. This isn't just a donation, it is an investment in human capital." The room was silent. Hannah had not just presented an alternative. She had presented a new philosophy. It was a hands-on, deeply involved approach that was far more demanding than writing a check to a university. She finished, her heart pounding. "The university can wait. These women cannot." She held her breath, awaiting the verdict. Evelyn Reed stared at her for a long, unblinking moment. Hannah braced for a sharp rebuttal. Instead, the older woman slowly nodded her head. "A compelling operational framework, Madam Chairwoman." Evelyn said, the slightest hint of a thaw in her voice. "I will have my team draft an implementation plan by Friday." It was the closest thing to a compliment Evelyn had ever given. Across the table, the other board members began to murmur their assent. Hannah had not pulled rank. She had not invoked her brother's name. She had won the argument on its merits, with passion logic and a vision they could not deny. As the meeting concluded, she stood and looked out the window at the city below. The crown was still heavy, but for the first time it felt like it truly belonged to her. Leo Sterling was born on a sun-drenched morning in early June, not in a flurry of panic, but in a calm, quiet hospital room overlooking Lake Michigan. Damien was by Hannah's side, a reassuring presence who held her hand and spoke of their childhood adventures. His calm narrative, a steady anchor in the rolling waves of her contractions. As she held her son, for the first time, a tiny, perfect being with a tuft of dark hair and his mother's deep blue eyes, Hannah felt the final fragmented pieces of her old life click into place to form a new unbreakable whole. This tiny, vulnerable person was her purpose. Everything she had endured, every moment of pain and humiliation, had led her here to this profound, overwhelming love. Life found a new rhythm. Days were a blend of board meetings conducted via video call and the soft, milky scent of her newborn son. The Lake Forest estate, once a symbol of a life she had run from, became a sanctuary of healing and joy. She would walk with Leo nestled in a carrier against her chest through the sprawling gardens, Damien often beside her, the reclusive tech billionaire, now a doting, hands-on uncle. 4 months after Leo's birth, Hannah stood on a makeshift stage in Chicago's Englewood neighborhood. The autumn air was crisp, and the sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. Behind her was the newly renovated South Side Sanctuary House, its formerly worn-out door now replaced with a sturdy, welcoming oak entrance. The building had been completely refurbished. A playground had been installed in the back, and inside there were new beds, a fully stocked kitchen, and dedicated counseling rooms. It was the first flagship project of her new initiative. Holding Leo, who was wrapped snugly in a cashmere blanket, Hannah stepped up to the microphone. The crowd wasn't the glittering elite of the St. Regis Gala. It was a collection of community leaders, volunteers, grateful residents, and news reporters. "A home is more than a roof over your head," she began. Her voice steady and clear, amplified by the speakers. "A home is a place where you are safe not just from the elements, but from harm. It is a place where your voice is heard, where your spirit is nurtured, and where you are allowed to be your whole self without fear." She didn't need notes. The words came from her heart. For too long, the people doing the most important work in our communities have been the most overlooked. They have been forced to fight for scraps to justify their existence, while their mission is the most vital one there is to provide sanctuary. Today that changes. The Sterling Foundation is making a promise not just to this house, but to dozens like it across the country. We will not just be your donors. We will be your partners, your champions, because we believe that the strength of a city is not measured by the height of its skyscrapers, but by how it cares for its most vulnerable. As she spoke, she saw a flicker of movement at the edge of the press corps. A local news van was parked across the street. Leaning against it, half hidden in the shadows, was a man. He was thinner, his expensive suit replaced by a rumpled polo shirt and ill-fitting khakis. His face was gaunt, his shoulders slumped in defeat. It was James. Their eyes met for a fleeting second across the distance. There was no recognition in his gaze, just the dull, vacant stare of a man observing a local news event he was likely being paid a pittance to cover as a freelance cameraman. He had no idea who she was. The powerful, radiant woman on the stage, holding her child and commanding the attention of the city, was a stranger to him. A year ago, that sight would have filled her with a bitter sense of triumph. Now she felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, not even satisfaction. He was simply a ghost, a footnote in a chapter of her life that was now firmly closed. He had not just lost his wealth and status, he had lost his relevance in her world entirely. She turned her attention back to the crowd, to the hopeful faces of the women and children her work would now protect. She finished her speech to warm, heartfelt applause. Maria Flores, the shelter's director, hugged her with tears in her eyes. Later that evening, back at the estate, Hannah sat by the fireplace, rocking a sleeping Leo in her arms. Damien sat opposite her, reading a book. The silence was comfortable, peaceful. She looked down at her son's face, at the legacy of the Sterling name now resting on his tiny shoulders. But it was a legacy she had redefined. It was no longer about hiding from the world, but about actively shaping it for the better. James had mocked her for nesting, for creating a home. He never understood that from the quietest nests, the strongest eagles learn to fly. And Hannah Sterling was finally soaring. Hannah's story is a powerful reminder that our true value is never determined by someone else's opinion. It's a testament to the fact that strength often lies dormant, waiting for the right moment to emerge, and that the quietest people can have the most powerful voices. James Thorne saw his wife as an accessory, a stepping stone. And in his arrogance, he completely missed the incredible woman standing right beside him. He learned the hard way that you should never underestimate anyone, because you never know the giants who walk beside them. Her journey from humiliation to empowerment is a story for anyone who has ever felt small, overlooked, or unappreciated. It proves that the ultimate victory isn't revenge. It's reclaiming your own narrative and building a future so bright it eclipses the shadows of the past. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life drama and powerful storytelling. What did you think of James's downfall? Let us know in the comments below.